I spent 2 hours cooking his favorite meal. I heard heels on my hardwood floor that weren't mine. And when he said, "I can explain," I didn't turn around. I just laughed. Not the kind of laugh that means something is funny, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest when your body finally understands what your mind has been refusing to accept for months. It was a single, quiet sound, and it scared him more than any scream ever could have. Let me back up. Marcus and I had been married for 9 years. 9 years of birthdays and grocery lists and arguments about whose turn it was to call the plumber. 9 years of inside jokes and Sunday mornings and building something together, brick by brick, that I genuinely believed was real. He was 41, I was 37. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, with a front porch I had painted myself and a kitchen I had renovated with my own tax return because Marcus said we couldn't afford it right now. He was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distribution company. Good salary, company car, lots of dinners with clients, lots of late nights, lots of conferences in cities I had never visited. I was a high school English teacher. I made less money than him and I worked twice as hard, and somehow, over the years, that became the invisible foundation of our arrangement. He brought home the bigger check, and I made the home worth coming back to. I cooked, I cleaned, I planned the vacations and remembered the anniversaries and bought the birthday gifts for his mother. I kept the house running like a well-maintained engine while he drove it wherever he wanted to go. And I loved him. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely, deeply loved that man. I loved the way he hummed when he was reading the newspaper. I loved that he still opened doors for me. I loved that he cried at the end of Field of Dreams every single time and then pretended he hadn't. That love is what makes what happened so devastating and so clarifying. It was a Wednesday in October. I remember because I had just finished grading a set of essays on The Great Gatsby, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of Cabernet, thinking about how every single one of my students had written about illusion versus reality, without any of them truly understanding what that meant yet. They would, I thought. Life has a way of teaching that lesson, whether you sign up for it or not. My phone buzzed. Marcus. "Hey, babe. Rough day. Any chance you could make the short ribs tonight? The ones with the red wine reduction? I've been thinking about them all day." Short ribs with red wine reduction. His absolute favorite. Mine too, honestly. But they take 2 hours minimum. You have to sear the meat just right. Let it braise low and slow. Build the sauce from scratch. It's not a weeknight dinner. It's a labor of love. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I went to the store. I bought the best short ribs the butcher had. A good bottle of Bordeaux for the braise. Not the cheap stuff, the real stuff, because that's what the recipe needed. Fresh thyme, pearl onions, 2 kinds of mushrooms. I came home and I put on music and I started cooking with the kind of focused, quiet joy that only comes when you're making something for someone you love. 2 hours. 2 full hours of careful, attentive cooking. The whole house smelled incredible. The table was set. I had even lit candles, not because it was a special occasion, just because I felt like it. Just because sometimes you want your life to look as warm as it feels. I heard his car in the driveway at 7:40. I heard the front door open. And then I heard it. A second set of footsteps, lighter than his, quicker. And then the unmistakable sound of a heel, a stiletto specifically, hitting the hardwood floor of my entryway. One single click that landed somewhere between my ears and my stomach, like a stone dropped into still water. I froze. My hand was on the wooden spoon. The sauce was simmering. The candles were lit. And I stood completely still, facing the stove, with my back to the kitchen doorway. And I listened. I heard him say something low and quick. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. The tone of a man trying to manage a situation. And then I heard her voice, soft, younger than mine. A small, uncertain laugh that died immediately when she must have seen the table set for 2 and the candles, and smelled what I had spent 2 hours making. They came into the kitchen doorway together. I did not turn around. Renata. His voice cracked on my name, just slightly. I can explain. And that's when I laughed. I set the wooden spoon down very carefully across the top of the pot. I reached over and turned the burner to low, and I stood there, still with my back to him, and I let the silence sit for a long moment before I finally spoke. The short ribs need another 15 minutes, I said. Don't let them burn. Then I picked up my wine glass, walked out of my own kitchen, past both of them without looking at either one, and I went upstairs to my bedroom, and I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. I finished my wine. I stared at the wall, and I began to plan. Here's what you need to understand about that moment. And this is the part people always get wrong when they imagine it. They think the worst feeling is the shock, but it wasn't. The shock lasted maybe 30 seconds. What came after the shock was something much colder and much more precise. Clarity. Absolute crystalline clarity about everything I had been half noticing and half ignoring for the better part of a year. The nights he came home after 11 smelling like he'd showered at the gym, but he hated the gym. The credit card statement with a charge from a restaurant downtown I'd never heard of, on a Tuesday when he'd told me he was eating at his desk. The weekend conference in Cincinnati, where he forgot to mention the hotel until I asked, and then gave me the name of a Marriott that, when I looked it up later, was fully booked that weekend. I had told myself I was being paranoid. I had talked myself out of every single red flag with the loyalty of a woman who had built her entire adult life inside this marriage and could not afford for it to be a lie. Turns out I couldn't afford for it not to be. Her name was Cassidy, 26 years old. She worked in his company's marketing department. Not even a different company, the same one, same building, same parking lot where I had dropped him off 100 times and waved from the car like a fool. I found all of this out within 48 hours of that Wednesday night. Not because Marcus told me. He told me almost nothing voluntarily. But because I stopped being passive and started paying attention. Marcus came upstairs that night after she left. And she did leave, because apparently even he had enough nerve left to send her home. And he stood in the bedroom doorway and said, "Renata, it's not what it looked like." I looked at him over my reading glasses, calm as a lake in November. What did it look like? He stumbled over his words. I was giving her a ride. She needed a ride to our house at 7:40 on a Wednesday night, I said. To our house, where I live, where you told me you wanted short ribs for dinner. I paused. Okay. Renata, go sleep in the guest room, Marcus. He started to argue. I picked up my book. He left. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because he had fundamentally misread who I was after 9 years, was that I had already made a decision in that bedroom while he was downstairs. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry in front of him. I was not going to demand answers that he would only lie about anyway. I was going to gather every piece of information I needed, protect every asset I had a legal right to, and then I was going to end this marriage on my terms, with documentation and with a lawyer who had a reputation for making unfaithful husbands deeply regret their choices. I have a very good friend named Patricia who went through a divorce 5 years ago. Her ex-husband had hidden a small business from her during their marriage. She found herself a family law attorney named Gerald Hoffman, and when everything was over, she walked away with half of something her husband had spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. I called Patricia the next morning from my car in the school parking lot, before first period. I need Gerald's number, I said. She didn't ask a single question. She just said, I'll text it to you right now. I met with Gerald 3 days later. I walked into his office with a manila folder containing printed copies of every suspicious credit card charge I could find, going back 14 months. Screenshots of 2 text messages I had managed to see before Marcus started locking his phone, and a handwritten timeline of every conference and late night at the office that I had quietly documented from memory. Gerald looked at everything, looked at me, and said, "You've done good preliminary work. Now let us do ours." Over the next 11 weeks, I lived my life as if nothing had changed. I want you to really absorb that. 11 weeks. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I went to parent-teacher conferences and graded papers and planned Thanksgiving with his family, because canceling Thanksgiving would have signaled something was wrong, and I needed him comfortable and unsuspecting while Gerald's team finished their work. It was the hardest performance of my life, and I delivered it flawlessly. What Gerald uncovered was worse than I had imagined, and at the same time, exactly what I had feared. Marcus had been seeing Cassidy for 14 months. Not a few weeks, not a drunken mistake. 14 months of restaurants and hotel weekends, and here's the part that made me go very quiet in Gerald's office. Cash withdrawals. 19 separate cash withdrawals over 11 months, totaling $23,400. Money from our joint account. My teaching salary was in that account. My money, used to fund dinners and weekend trips, and, as best as Gerald's financial investigator could determine, at least 3 pieces of jewelry, none of which I had ever seen. He had also, and this one took my breath away, taken a cash advance on a credit card I didn't know existed. A card in both our names that he had opened without my knowledge and listed our home address as the billing address, which is why I'd never seen the statements. The balance on that card was $11,200. $23,400 in cash, $11,200 in secret debt. That's $34,600. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning in late January, 2 days after we had celebrated New Year's Eve together at a party at his colleague's house where I had worn a red dress and smiled for photographs all night. The papers were served to Marcus at his office at 10:15 in the morning. I know because his assistant called me. Not Marcus, his assistant, a woman named Donna who had known me for years. And she said, very quietly, "Renata, he just got something from a process server. Are you okay?" "I'm wonderful, Donna," I said. "Thank you for asking." Marcus called me 17 times between 10:15 and noon. I let every call go to voicemail. I was in my classroom teaching a unit on dramatic irony, which I will admit I found quietly hilarious, and I did not look at my phone until my lunch break. His voicemails went through the predictable stages: shock, anger, bargaining. The 4th one, he was crying. The 12th one, he was furious and calling me vindictive. The 17th one, his voice was flat and exhausted, and he said, "Renata, please, just talk to me." I listened to all 17. Then I ate my sandwich. Then I went back to class. The divorce proceedings took 4 months. Marcus hired a lawyer, of course, and his lawyer was competent but not exceptional, which turned out to matter quite a lot. Gerald was exceptional. Gerald had the bank records, the credit card records, the financial investigator's report, and a very organized presentation of exactly where $34,600 in marital funds had gone. In Ohio, dissipation of marital assets, which is the legal term for what Marcus had done, spending marital money on an extramarital affair, is taken seriously in divorce court. It doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it shapes them considerably. I received the house, which we owned outright because we had paid off the mortgage 2 years prior. I received 60% of our joint retirement and investment accounts. I received a settlement that covered not only half of the secret credit card debt, but restitution for a significant portion of the dissipated funds. My attorney's fees were awarded against Marcus. In total, I left that marriage with the house, approximately $218,000 in assets, and 0 debt. Marcus left with Cassidy, a studio apartment on the east side of Columbus, and a financial situation that, by all accounts, he was still untangling a year later. And Cassidy, well, Cassidy apparently had not known he was married, or perhaps she had known and had told herself a convenient story. Either way, when the divorce proceedings became public record, and her own family found out she had been involved with a married man for over a year, I'm told the conversation at her parents' dinner table that Easter was not pleasant. I didn't arrange that. I didn't have to. The truth did its own work. The last thing Marcus ever said to me directly was in the parking lot outside the courthouse on the day our divorce was finalized. He was thinner than I remembered. His suit didn't fit the same way. He looked at me across the asphalt with an expression I recognized. It was the same look he got when a sales deal fell apart, that particular combination of disbelief and wounded ego. And he said, "I hope you're happy." I thought about that for exactly 1 second. "I will be," I said, and I walked to my car. I live in that house now. My house. I painted the front porch a different color last spring, a deep, saturated blue that my neighbors keep complimenting. I still cook short ribs sometimes, on cold Sunday afternoons when I have nowhere to be. I eat them at the kitchen table with a good glass of wine and a book I actually want to read, and the candles I light are lit for nobody's benefit but mine. I am 40 years old. I am not broken. I am not bitter. I am not waiting for an apology that will never come in a form that would mean anything anyway. I am, in the most complete and unambiguous sense of the word, free. And the short ribs, by the way, I turned the burner off that night before I went upstairs. I put the whole pot in the refrigerator. I ate leftovers the next evening, alone, at my own table. They were perfect.